The story begins not with thunder or chaos but with whispers that moved across the highlands of Iringa like unseen wind. It was 1891, a time when Africa's skies were still vast and free, yet heavy with something approaching. The Wahehe people lived proud and fearless on their ancestral land, believing their mountains would always guard them. But one day, they heard rumors that men from the sea had come, wearing strange uniforms, carrying iron sticks that spat fire. The colonizers had arrived, and with them came a shadow that stretched across every hill and valley. Yet, even before the first soldiers set foot in Kalinga, Chief Mkwawa had already made up his mind. His people would never kneel. When the first smoke appeared on the horizon, the Wahehe gathered in silence. From the hilltop, Mkwawa watched the enemy's movements with calm eyes. He was not afraid. He knew what his fathers had taught him. No empire is greater than the courage of the people who love their land. Behind him stood his warriors, hands gripping their spears, hearts steady. "Let them come," Mkwawa said, his voice low and firm. "We are the sons of this soil. No man commands it but us." His words echoed down the slopes, reaching villages where drums began to beat, not in celebration, but in warning. Women carried the rhythm from one valley to another, and soon the entire land pulsed with the same message: prepare. In the valleys, the old ones whispered prayers to the ancestors. The young men sharpened spears, tested bows, and swore that no stranger would claim their homes. Across the hills, the Wahehe united not through force but through purpose. They did not fight for gold or land. They fought for dignity. Each heartbeat was a declaration that Africa belonged to Africans. While the colonizers wrote maps and drew borders, the Wahehe prepared to defend what could never be drawn on paper: their spirit. When the first German column reached the outskirts of Kalinga, the soldiers expected surrender. They marched with heavy steps, confident that a few rifles could silence an entire people. But the Wahehe knew their land better than any invader. The hills watched in silence. The air grew still. And then it happened. A roar erupted from the tall grass. It was as if the earth itself had opened to strike back. Spears flew like lightning, arrows darkened the sky, and drums thundered from every direction. The soldiers stumbled, trapped in a storm they could not see coming. Confusion turned to panic, and the mighty colonial force fell apart within moments. Those who survived ran back to their base, shaken, their pride shattered. That day, the world's so-called giants learned that the Wahehe were no ordinary warriors, they were unbowed. News of the ambush spread quickly. In distant cities, German officers were stunned. How could villagers defeat trained men of the empire? They called it an accident, a mistake, but deep down they knew the truth. The Wahehe were not afraid to die because they fought for something death could not take: their freedom. A missionary who passed through the aftermath wrote in his diary, "They do not fight for gold or rule, but for something no empire understands: honor." Those words would one day become the very spirit of the resistance. Back in Kalinga, Mkwawa stood among his people. "They will return," he told them, "and when they do, they will bring fire. But fire cannot burn the wind, and we are the wind." The Wahehe cheered, but quietly. They understood the cost of freedom. They knew the next battle would be harder. And yet there was no fear in their hearts, only purpose. Over the next 2 years, the war raged across the highlands. The Germans returned again and again, each time with more soldiers, more weapons, and more anger. But every time, the Wahehe vanished into the hills, striking from nowhere and fading back into the mist. The colonizers began to whisper that these warriors were spirits, untouchable, invisible, unending. But they were not ghosts. They were men and women who refused to surrender. One morning, as dawn broke over the Lugalo Valley, Mkwawa led a silent march through the mist. His warriors moved like the breath of the earth. When the German army appeared, confident and loud, the Wahehe unleashed their might once again. The battle lasted only hours, but its echo traveled all the way to Berlin. More than 300 soldiers of the empire fell that day, defeated by unity, courage, and love for home. From that moment, even the colonizers began to call Mkwawa the man who defies empires. In the heart of Tanganyika, his legend was born, but victory always comes with a price. The Germans, humiliated and furious, swore vengeance. They returned with greater numbers and deadlier weapons. Villages were burned, crops destroyed. Yet even as their world turned to ash, the Wahehe refused to bow. Mothers carried messages through the night. Children guarded paths between hills. Warriors moved like shadows, striking where no one expected. "We cannot match their guns," Mkwawa told his council. "But we can match their resolve." Those words became a promise that lived longer than the war itself. As the fighting dragged on, the empire began to twist the truth. They called the Wahehe savages, rebels, uncivilized. But even among the colonizers, some knew better. One soldier confessed in a letter home, "We are not fighting men, we are fighting ghosts." Because the Wahehe fought with something stronger than any army faith. They believed their ancestors watched over them, that their land itself protected them. And that belief turned every man and woman into a warrior. By 1894, the war reached its darkest hour. The Wahehe had lost much, but not their pride. The colonizers occupied their land, but not their hearts. In those final months, Chief Mkwawa became a symbol, a living wall against despair. His people began to call him the wall that does not fall. He was more than a leader. He was the spirit of defiance itself. Even as the smoke of destruction filled the skies, Mkwawa stood firm, his heart echoing one truth. Empires can conquer land, but they can never conquer memory. And memory, in the hills of Iringa, was stronger than any empire ever built. The story of the Wahehe is not just a forgotten chapter in history, it is a lesson written in courage. It reminds every African child that their ancestors once faced giants and refused to bow. Resistance, after all, is not born from hate, it is born from love. Love for land, love for dignity, and love for freedom. And as long as that love remains, no empire will ever truly win. Would you have stood with Mkwawa that day? Would you have fought, even when defeat seemed certain? Comment below. Unbowed forever. The sun rose heavy that morning over Kalenga, painting the hills in a deep gold that felt almost sacred. But the silence was different. It was the silence before a storm. The Wahehe warriors stood scattered across the ridges, watching the horizon darken with the smoke of foreign guns. Chief Mkwawa stood tall among them, his mind quiet but alert. For years, he had led his people through a storm of fire, always one step ahead of an empire determined to erase them. But now, the storm had returned stronger than ever. And this time, it carried the scent of finality. From the east, the German columns approached, thousands strong, their boots crushing the same soil that had nurtured generations of Wahehe life. Behind them rolled cannons, the machines of war that had silenced nations before. But Mkwawa was not a man easily silenced. He had seen too much, lost too many, and learned that freedom was not a word, it was breath. And once a people tasted it, no chain could fit them again. Today, Mkwawa said to his council, his voice firm and calm, "They come to end us. But we are not ending, we are becoming." Those words traveled through the ranks like fire. Every warrior knew what they meant. Even if the land was taken, their story would live. That was enough reason to fight. As the first gunfire echoed through the valley, the Wahehe launched their counterattack. Arrows soared, spears pierced through smoke, and war cries rolled like thunder. The Germans were met not by fear, but by fury born from love. The hills trembled. For a brief, glorious moment, it felt as though the Wahehe might drive them back once more. But this battle was different. The enemy had learned. Their rifles were faster, their cannons louder, and their numbers overwhelming. Within hours, the ridges were ablaze. Yet, even surrounded, the Wahehe did not falter. Women carried water to the warriors. Children ran messages between outposts. Every soul became part of the resistance. The Germans called them rebels, but in truth they were the defenders of something sacred, their right to exist freely. Smoke thickened in the air, and through it, Mkwawa watched his homeland burn. But his heart did not tremble. "You can burn the grass," he whispered, "but you cannot burn the roots." The Germans pushed deeper into Kalenga, finding nothing but resistance. Every path they took, every tree they passed, hid eyes watching, waiting. The land itself fought alongside the Wahehe. Days turned to weeks. The resistance refused to die. But slowly the cost grew unbearable. Villages that once sang with laughter now lay silent. The rivers ran dark with ashes. The old and the young alike had given all they had. Even the strongest warriors began to feel the weight of loss pressing against their spirit. Yet Mkwawa refused to surrender. "If they want the heart of this land," he said, "they will have to tear it from me." By mid-1894, the siege reached its peak. The Germans surrounded Kalinga completely. Their commanders demanded Mkwawa's capture. They wanted his head as proof that the empire had triumphed. For them, this was not just war, it was a message to every African who dared to dream of freedom. But for Mkwawa, it was something deeper. It was the moment to show that no empire could ever crush a people's soul. One night, under the dim light of a dying fire, Mkwawa called his closest men. The air was still, the sound of distant gunfire fading. "My brothers," he said, "the time has come. I will not let them take me. My death will speak louder than their guns." His men begged him to flee, to escape into the forest and continue the fight. But he shook his head. "If I live, they will hunt us forever. If I fall, they will never understand how we stood so tall." When dawn came, the Germans found the fortress quiet. They entered cautiously, expecting an ambush. What they discovered instead was silence, heavy, eternal silence. Chief Mkwawa was gone, but not captured. He had chosen his fate, leaving behind a message that echoed across the land. Better to die free than to live enslaved. They took his skull, sending it to Germany as a trophy, a grim reminder of colonial arrogance. But what they did not realize was that they had only taken bone. The spirit they tried to capture had already returned to the earth. The people carried his story in whispers, songs, and memory. Mothers told their children, "He did not die. He became the wind that guards our hills." And so the Wahehe resistance lived on not as soldiers but as a legacy. Years later, even as colonial rule spread deeper into Africa, the story of Mkwawa refused to fade. Secret meetings were held in villages where people repeated his words. "We are the sons of this soil." His defiance became the quiet strength of a continent awakening. His courage inspired new generations who would one day demand independence with the same unyielding spirit. When Germany eventually lost its colonies and Tanganyika passed to new hands, elders would still point toward the mountains and say, "That is where the unbowed warriors stood. That is where freedom began to dream." The empire that once seemed unbreakable had vanished, but the name Mkwawa remained unshaken. Today, when the wind moves through Iringa, it carries his story. It reminds the land that some battles are never lost because their truth lives beyond time. Chief Mkwawa's stand was not about victory, it was about memory. He showed that the strength of a people lies not in their weapons, but in their will. The Wahehe may have been defeated in battle, but in spirit, they were immortal. History books may forget their names, but the soil remembers. The hills of Tanzania still echo with the rhythm of drums that once defied the empire. And every African heart that refuses to bow still beats in time with those warriors who fought beneath the sun of Kalinga. Because the greatest resistance is not the fight against soldiers, it is the refusal to forget who you are. If Chief Mkwawa's courage still inspires you today, comment below. The spirit never dies. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true African stories that the world tried to erase.